was at a meeting a few years ago, and one of the guys there was a senior staff officer of our sheriff's department, and we were talking about integrity. And he said one of the things they do at the sheriff's department is, for instance, they will take a $20 bill and put it in the men's locker room, and then watch who goes in there and see if it's there after they have left. And he said it's a simple integrity test as to whether or not the person is honest. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. As I thought about that for the last few weeks, it strikes me that it's rather a difficult passage, at least the first part. Lead us not into temptation. Who are we praying to? God. Does God lead people into temptation? I don't think so. Jordi gave me a little booklet that he edited and hopes to publish from the 1890s, and in that booklet the man says there are times in which God may allow us to gain riches or be poor so that he sees what we're made of, because either being rich or being poor affects how you live, and therefore you're led into temptation. I'm not sure I buy that. The church fathers, at least in the passages I read, seem to indicate that perhaps a better translation is, do not bring us to the test, because we might fail. That's the test. You know? If we pick that up and put it in our pocket, we failed the test. And there are many tests in life, aren't there? How we act, how we treat people. It's not just stealing. Do we put ourselves in a position where we become losers? Lead us not into temptation, or do not bring us to the test. And then, of course, the next part is, but deliver us from evil. Now, one of the things we have to struggle with is the whole concept of evil. You have friends who go to churches where the devil is everywhere, and he's going to get you. And then you have friends who go to other churches, and it's kind of like, oh, an antiquated myth. Now, Jesus says there's a devil. Our baptism says what? We are to fight against the world, the flesh, and the devil. So he exists. Evil exists. The bishop and I, when we were in seminary, he seems to have forgotten most about seminary, and I understand why. I was there. But we had a professor who was a fascinating man. He was my advisor, in fact. And he had been a soldier in the Second World War, rose to the rank of colonel, wounded several times. And then, of course, they put him, became involved in the war trials. And he told us, after seeing the things he saw and working with the SS officers he had to deal with, he said there is more evil in the world than you and I can take credit for. Evil exists. And we want to be delivered from it. We want to fight the world, the flesh, and the devil. And therefore we have to ask ourselves, how do we deal with it? Well, I was thinking today that the Mass, at the end of the Mass, and I think we just started this year. right, Father? The last gospel? No?
It's been a couple of years.
Okay. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, da-da-da-da-da. He was the light. The light shineth into darkness. The darkness, what's the word? Recognize? Comprehended it not. Light. When something shines, when light shines on something, you see it, don't you? Now, for instance, one of the things I think we need to think about in terms of evil, and what is it, is a simple thing. If light shines on it, am I happy with it? For instance, everyone here probably could call up their mom or their dad tonight and say, last night we had benediction, and I went to it. In the light, that would be wonderful, wouldn't it? Now, if one of you were to swipe my pipe and fill it up with my tobacco and smoke it, would you call up your parents and say, I swiped Father's pipe, I took his tobacco, and I smoked 12 pipefuls? And the answer is no, I would be ashamed of it. Well, if you can't tell your parents what you're doing, maybe you shouldn't be doing it. Then there's another part of our worship. And that is, what is the name of this conference? Well, it took you long enough. St. Michael's Conference. What did St. Michael do? That's a nice way to put it. He knocked the devil out of heaven. He is the defender of heaven. He is God's warrior. If you do something, again, in darkness, could you put your hand, those of you who have been here 3 years, on that medal? And say, oh, Michael, I'm sure you'd approve of this. Or would you? Run away from it. And so I guess what I'm saying is one of the things you ought to think about is when you're about to do something, could you say, Michael, Archangel, Defender of Heaven, the Archangel I am dedicated to, guide me when I'm about to. Or would you say, could you go someplace else? I'm about to be naughty. And then probably the strongest is what we do every morning here. It's called the Eucharist, the Mass, Holy Communion. Today, we remember what? The Mass in our prayers. All the lessons you've listened to today deal with the Mass. It's fascinating to me that there are churches that do not reverence the Mass as we do. Do not have communion. And frequently they are churches which talk about Scripture all the time. Now, Scripture's really clear. Unless you eat my body and drink my blood, you have no part in me. One were to carry that to its logical conclusion, what is it really saying? You don't receive Mass, you don't go to heaven. I'm not sure I want to go that far. But we we have prayers we say, that we become part of him, and he becomes part of us. In other words, when we receive this sacrament, along with a lot of others, well, there are only 6 others, but along with 6 others, we are united to Christ. We are expected to be like Christ. We are expected to live like Christ. We say in Scripture, and in the 79 prayer book, that Jesus was tempted in every way we are, yet did not sin. Temptation is natural. I want you to know that just because you are tempted doesn't mean you're evil. If you give into it, you've gone to the dark side. You really have. And so our job is not to go to the dark side. We don't want to fail the test, and we don't want to live in darkness. And the best way to avoid it is to be strengthened by his body